Thank you. Thanks for being here this morning. The overall theme of this TEDx symposium is under pressure, and I don't think it's a news flash to anybody out there that there's a lot of stress in the world, that we're surrounded by it. I'm going to talk to you today about the chi of Goldilocks, and we've all probably heard of the story of Goldilocks and the Three Bears, but you might be wondering, what in the world can Goldilocks tell me about stress, and what in the world does she know about chi? So, we're all aware of the story of Goldilocks and the Three Bears, and the theme that runs through that story from about 200 years ago of just right, just being in balance. You know, the porridge was too hot or too cold. The chair was too hard or too soft. That was the bed. The chair was too big or too small. The idea of being just right, just in balance is something that stress takes us out of. And this was a story from 200 years ago. But traditional Chinese medicine has a history of 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years. The history of Ayurvedic medicine has a history of 4,000 to 5,000 years. And in Ayurvedic medicine, prana is this idea of balance and life force. In traditional Chinese medicine, chi is this idea of life force or being in balance and being vital. When we study these concepts using Western techniques, we can study them biochemically like I do. We can study them psychologically. When we study them psychologically, we study them with a terminology that we call vigor. Vigor is a psychological mood state. You can see the definition of it here. A three-tiered mood state characterized by physical energy, mental acuity, and emotional well-being. That's what vigor is. The opposite of vigor in psychology research is burnout. And burnout's a word that's come from research into the public vocabulary. We use that word on a regular basis. We understand what it means, but vigor is the opposite of that. So when a TCM expert is talking about chi, I can measure that, and I measure it as vigor. And we can intervene with vigor. We know what goes into somebody feeling high vigor or low vigor and burnout. This is a word cloud from one of my books. My 16-year-old daughter was duly impressed that I could make a word cloud in the first place. But you can see some of the concepts that go into an examination of whether somebody has high vigor or low vigor. Stress, of course, the primary stress hormone cortisol, inflammation, oxidation, blood sugar levels, or what we would call allocation, or glycation. All kinds of biochemistry underneath the surface drives how we feel. So in my research, we very often are looking at how biochemistry drives the psychology, how biochemistry is driving how we're feeling on a day-to-day basis. And the thing that's interesting about studying TCM, traditional Chinese medicine, is that they knew all about vigor. They didn't call it that. They knew all about the biochemistry, even though they didn't. They were using natural substances, herbs and fruits and seeds and nuts and plants to rebalance the body's biochemistry. What they were observing is an improvement in chi. They were observing an improvement in vigor. And it's funny when we study this in our lab, we can see people coming back to life, so to speak. I'll talk about that in a little bit. I won't go through all these bullet points, but I want to focus you on the last three. No matter what set of statistics you look at, no matter what population survey we uncover, we're looking at about 65 to 90% of the American population, broader than that, the North American population, that has enough chronic stress in their lives to result in some sort of a chronic health condition, basically a stress-related disease. And there's a lot of them. When we look at how stress is linked to diseases, it's linked to almost every chronic disease. It's linked to obesity, it's linked to diabetes, it's linked logically to the sort of mental disorders, the things like dementia and depression and things that happen in the brain, but also to diseases that you think might not have any bearing on a stress response, things like osteoporosis and wrinkles even. So there's lots going on in the body in response to stress. When I talk about stress, it's not just the stress that we're under, it's not just the traffic jam that we're sitting in, it's not just the work deadline that we have or the family issues that we have going on. I talk about it in biochemical terms. So when we're under stress, there are changes in our body's level of oxidation, there are changes in our levels of inflammation, changes in our levels of stress hormones, changes, I don't have it on the slide, but changes in our levels of blood sugar control. And those all have their own set of circumstances, but they all overlap with each other, which makes it both interesting and frustrating to study. And these sources of imbalance, or these sources of stress, are everywhere, all around us in the world. There are emotional sources, there are physical sources, there are environmental sources of stress. Dietary sources is primarily what I study, whether we're eating a so-called good diet or a poor diet. And if we accept that these sources of unbalance are all around us and we can't avoid them, we need to reestablish balance in the body. So when we study these different groups that are under stress in different ways, sometimes we'll look at athletes who are overtrained and training very hard. We look at dieters, people who are restricting their calories to lose weight. We'll look at short sleepers, people who are not getting 8 hours of sleep every night. Is there anybody in here who might be in that category? Usually every hand in the audience goes up. And then people who are exposed to normal levels of day-to-day, in-and-out stress. And what we find is that all of those groups share the exact same biochemical disruptions. Cortisol is up, testosterone is down, more oxidation, more inflammation, etc. We also find that they share the same psychological disruptions that are being driven by that biochemistry. We see more fatigue, we see more depression, we see more problems with mental focus. We see, when we look at the athletes, we see belly fat gains, things like that. But when we balance the biochemistry, no matter what intervention we're looking at, stress management interventions, dietary interventions, their biochemistry changes and their psychology changes all in the same direction. So when we're tired, stressed, and depressed, we just feel off. We might put our own terminology on it. And when we feel that way, we may reach for one of the many solutions that's out there that's supposed to help us feel better and get back on track. So if it's mood that's off, we might reach for an antidepressant. If it's restlessness that's our problem, we might reach for a prescription sleep medication. If it's fatigue that is our big problem driven by changes in stress, we might reach for, I see people laughing, this is resonating with a lot of people. We might be reaching for an energy drink, or this is my poison here, coffee, to alleviate that fatigue and get us back to where we think we need to be. And we're collectively spending about $80 billion a year on these so-called solutions. And I don't want to stand here and say that they're bad or they're ineffective, but they're certainly not hitting the bullseye. If we accept that our vigor is off, or our vigor is not as high as it should be, because of these biochemical disruptions, not a single thing that you see up here addresses those biochemical disruptions. They're doing other things, but they're probably not getting us to feel exactly the way we want to feel with high vigor. And that, I think, speaks to the fact that we're not looking deep enough very often. You know, if we got in our cars right now and we drove up Little Cottonwood Canyon and we went to Albion Basin, beautiful area of the world, we would see 6 feet of snow and we would think, this is a frozen wasteland. We wouldn't realize, maybe, we would because we live here, that in 3 months' time there's going to be millions of wildflowers bursting through, right? We need to look at these deeper levels. That's what we're trying to do with the biochemistry. We're trying to see what triggers in the body, in an individual cell, in an individual tissue. Can we flip those? Can we rebalance the biochemistry to get you back to that state of high vigor? So we've done interventions where we've looked at just the oxidative stress, or just the inflammatory stress, or just the allostatin, the cortisol testosterone stress, or just the blood sugar stress. And no matter what happens, when we rebalance that aspect of biochemistry, we improve the psychology. People feel better in different ways. The reason why that's exciting, I think, is that feeling better is great. Everybody wants to feel better. But if you feel good in here, in your body, you'll do good out there. You'll have more energy, you'll have more motivation, you'll have more get up and go to do something, to build a business, to spend it with your family, to volunteer in the community. Whatever it is, you'll have more feeling of doing something. When we do our interventions, they're typically 8 to 12-week interventions of diet or stress management or sleep interventions, whatever they are. And people will come back to us and tell us how they're feeling. So people will say the words that make up vigor, but nobody says vigor, right? We just don't talk that way. They'll say energy, they'll say mood, they'll say mental function. And we had a woman one time who was trying to describe, she didn't want to say vigor because that was the subject of our study. And she said, yeah, energy, yeah, mood, yeah, I'm getting a little bit of all of that. But you can see she didn't have the word for what she was feeling in her body. And finally she just kind of shrugged her shoulders and gave up and sat down. She goes, I don't know, I just know I'm getting a lot more vacuuming done. And everybody laughed and she felt really embarrassed. And I had to single her out and say, no, that's exactly it. You felt more motivation to get up off your chair and do something. That's what vigor is all about. So feeling good is important. There's a more insidious thing going on here, is that those feelings are kind of a signal, not just for the biochemistry, but for this overall concept in our bodies that we refer to generally as being catabolic. Our tissues are breaking down faster. And so here I'm showing you a neuron because it's very visual. You can show tissue, you can see tissue breakdown in this particular cell without being a neurologist or a neuroanatomist. You can see that the one on the left-hand side just looks a lot healthier in a low-stress situation than the one on the right side. You can see the one on the right side, after it's exposed to any of those sorts of cellular stressors, it has become physically degraded. It's broken down faster than the body can build it back up. And this happens in every single tissue in the body, not just the brain. It happens in the skin, it happens in the bones, it happens in the heart, it happens in the lungs, it happens in the blood vessels, it happens in every single tissue. When we're out of balance, we're breaking down faster, except one. One tissue becomes anabolic instead of catabolic. It builds up, and that's our visceral fat, our belly fat. And I've colorized it here so you can pick it out better. In a high-stress situation, we gain abdominal fat. It's a very interesting human trait. It's not just a human trait, it's a mammalian trait. We see it across all of our animal studies as well, that when we're under stress, we break down everywhere, but we build up here. And that's bad for a lot of reasons. So we can become out of balance because of our diet, because of our environment, because of the stress we're exposed to. I said before, we're surrounded by these kinds of things. So I want to give you an example of how we're controlling some of this biochemistry right at the cellular, and even more than that, right at the genetic level, to help people feel better and help people thrive in the face of the stressful world that we live in. We do it with all kinds of different dietary interventions or herbal interventions. We know that if we eat poorly, we're going to feel bad. We know if we eat well, we're going to feel better, and we're trying to tease out the biochemistry of why that is. I really feel that we can help people in all of these areas to sort of feel better, look better, perform better. These are the things that people go for, but when you coalesce all of them together, they can get back to where they used to be if they're not in a good place. They become their better future self. And this is how we do it when we look at oxidative stress, which is a very hot area of research right now. Every single one of our cells has an internal system of antioxidant enzymes. When our cells are under stress, they have the ability to protect themselves. We can turn on these systems and protect ourselves from the polluted air or from the stress that's going on because we're sitting in traffic. We have antioxidant enzymes, glutathione, superoxide dismutase, catalase, and a whole raft of other protective enzymes that protect us from the stress that we're exposed to every day. There's a vast, vast scientific literature that's trying to tease out all of these different triggers. And one of them is called NRF2, NRF2. It looks like it's the master thermostat for stress inside of every cell. So when the cell is under stress, this thermostat senses it, flips some switches, and the body is able to protect itself. And we know, we're starting to be able to drill down and see what bioactives in those traditional Chinese remedies are actually effective. So we can look at the EGCG from green tea, we can look at the curcumin from turmeric. We're actually getting down to the bioactive level. And what we find is that when you use one of those NRF2 activators, or use a combination of them, which is more common in traditional Chinese medicine, that activator attaches to a cell surface receptor, causes a chemical change, so that this NRF2, which is sitting inside your cell and anchored by another protein called KEAP1, you have a releasing. That NRF2 activates this releasing. So what happens is that NRF2 can now translocate into the nucleus where it has its activity. It attaches to a point on the DNA called the antioxidant response element, and bam, your body produces all of these protective enzymes. All these protective genes are activated to make proteins to protect yourself and to clean up the damage from whatever that stressor was. It's a very, very elegant to be able to measure it in a bioassay, in a cellular assay. We can measure this, we can show the translocation, we can show percent activation. It's wonderful. But what happens when we actually do this in people? What happens when we feed them turmeric or green tea or milk thistle or any of these things that we know have been used for thousands of years in CCM? Do we get the same sort of activation? And we do. There's a wide range of studies that show this. I'm going to show you data from one particular one that's pretty recent. When we feed people these NRF2 activators, we have all that cellular metabolism going on. we can see a huge improvement in those protective enzymes, superoxide dismutase and catalase, which is fantastic. But then even more importantly, we can show a reduction in overall damage in that cell. As we age, everybody in here is aging, sad news to hear, I know, but from the age of 20 to the age of 80 in this particular study, there's a progressive increase in your cellular damage. It's just, it happens. You know, there's no way to really avoid that, we think. You can see that just goes up and up and up. Supplementation is one way that people think with vitamins, vitamin E, vitamin C, beta-carotene, those sorts of things, is one way that people think we can prevent some of that oxidative damage. But lo and behold, when we supplement in this particular study, when we segregate out supplement users and non-users, what we find is that the supplement users actually had somewhat higher level of oxidative damage in their bodies. So that clearly wasn't working. When we applied some of these NRF2 activators for 30 days, we're able to reduce that age-related increase in oxidative stress. So much so that we're able to actually completely remove that age-related increase. So that an 80-year-old was, from a cellular stress standpoint, was equivalent to a 20-year-old. Very, very exciting stuff from the biochemistry side of it. But I think that the bigger promise of this is that when we control oxidation and get you back down to normal, when we control inflammation and get you back down to normal, when we control cortisol and get you back down to normal, that biochemistry exerts itself as psychology. We feel better. Nobody in any of these studies wakes up the next morning and says, ooh, my level of oxidation feels really good today, right? We don't feel that in our body. What we feel is the cascade up to the psychology so that we're expressing that psychology, we're expressing that vigor, we're expressing that chi is coming back into our bodies. So I think that we have the opportunity globally, if we can figure out how to do this from a natural basis, with our diet, with our lifestyles, with some of these herbal supplements, we can help people to feel better, we can help people to look better, we can help people to perform better, and that will end up being a pay-forward kind of a thing. If you have that motivation and that get up and go in your body, you're going to go out and do something with that, and hopefully that'll be something good. Thank you very much.